your direct testimony, correct?
Yes.
And is the general area of Fairview, is that in close proximity to the Norwood Airport?
I mentioned it's a mile away.
Right, so it's fairly close, right?
A mile.
Right, so you would expect that the readings you talked about on your direct examination would have a direct bearing and relevance to the 34 Fairview Road in Canton, is that correct?
Yes. Relevance, yes.
Yes. So what I would like to do is to draw your attention to the exhibit that was just marked, if Your Honor. We have that. May I approach, please?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Gilman, this is Exhibit 64. If I could hand that to you, please.
Thank you.
And you can keep that in front of you. If we could publish. Excuse me, Your Honor, may I publish?
Yes.
Thank you. If you can enlarge just, no, not the whole thing, just the chart up above, and make that as large as you could for the jury, please. That is very good. Thank you. You see where we are. And Mr. Goodman, you can either look on the screen or look on the document, whichever is best for you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So let's start with the top, which is estimated hourly snowfall ending at. This is for January 29th, 2022, correct?
Yes.
And what does not appear on this chart, but I want to make sure I can get this as accurate as possible, would it be appropriate to, before 1 a.m., to add a 0.2 for what you mentioned on direct for midnight? You mentioned there was a little bit starting, and there was a 0.2. Is that correct? Did I hear that correct?
If you want to get the total for the snowfall event, yes.
Okay, so we'll just have, if you will, an imaginary 0.2 up at the top. And what I'm going to do, sir, is I'm going to go through the hourly snowfall, because there are times that you have on your chart that are relevant in this matter. So let's start with, and just do it chronologically by time. And what I'm going to ask you to do is to do a little bit of math as we go through. If you need a calculator, I think it's going to be fairly straightforward math for someone with your skills, but take your time when we get through it. So we start at midnight, and you mentioned the concept of visibility on your direct examination, correct?
Yes.
And I believe you said on your direct examination that at midnight there was, quote, very little snow precipitation. Is that correct?
I believe I said there was very little snow on the ground.
Very little snow on the ground, and I think you used the phrase track a cat?
Enough to track a cat, exactly.
Right. And so enough to track a cat, but a fairly small amount, correct?
I don't know how to define it any better than enough to track a cat.
Very good, sir. I'll go with track a cat.
That's as small as amount as you can get. And again, that would be on a natural surface, not necessarily on pavement.
Right. And what would the variation be, if at all, on pavement?
Oh, a lot of factors would come into play. Most importantly, since this was a forecasted storm event, the town may have pre-treated the road. That lowers the freezing point of the precipitation, so it would, even if it was 25 degrees, it might be melting on the road.
So in terms of the factor you just talked about, for example, pre-treatment, that could cause the accumulation, the numbers here to be lower than what we're seeing on the chart, correct?
Definitely, correct.
But there's not a scenario where it could be higher, is it, at this point?
Well, there are places, especially with this kind of wind and dry, fluffy snow, that you would have drifting.
Right, but with just 0.2 inches on the ground, would you expect drifting?
No,
Okay.
Absolutely not.
Right,
Not unless I was a very small animal.
I was going to say, tracking a cat wouldn't
Yeah.
seem to work very well if you've only
No.
got drifting with 0.2.
I thought you were asking about the larger numbers.
No, sir. Good point. What I'd like to do is to just concentrate on the beginning here and midnight and 1 a.m., and then we'll progress down through, okay? I want to snapshot it, if you will, starting at the very beginning. So we then move to 1 a.m., which is 0.3 inches, correct?
Correct.
Now, if you add, and it seems like to be most accurate, to each number here, we would add a 0.2 to get the total, correct?
Correct.
So if we go to 1 a.m. on January 29, 2022, we've only got 0.5 inches of snow per this chart, correct?
Total so far, yes.
And that could, on the road, that could be less because of municipal pre-treatment. If they pre-treated for the storm, they could have put some chemicals down that would have caused a melt and therefore less. That's a possibility.
That's one factor. Another factor would just be the road may be warmer for a number of reasons.
So that could be another reason why it might be less, another factor.
Absolutely.
Okay, so now let's go to, I want to go between 1 and 2 a.m. Let's assume a time of 1:45 a.m. on January 29, 2022. Is it correct that the accumulation would be less than 0.8 inches at that point, according to your chart?
By 2 a.m., it would be less than 0.8, yes.
Correct.
Therefore, by 1:45, it would be less than 0.8, yes.
Right, so-
Or equal to, if yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you,
Less
sir.
than or equal to.
Right, so you used 2 a.m., right, which would mean that it was 0.8, correct?
Correct.
And then if you work back 15 minutes at 1:45 a.m., it would be less than 0.8, correct?
If it was still snowing in those 15 minutes.
Right.
Yes.
So, but I just want to focus on the number.
Yeah.
At 1:45 a.m., it's less than 0.8 inches, correct?
It's less than 0.8 inches.
Yes,
Okay.
right, alrighty. So, and that is, to state it another way, is it correct to say it's just 0.8 of an inch? Is that correct?
0.8 is 0.8 of an inch. yes.
Right, another way to say it. So, in terms of the time now, and this may get a little more complicated, sir, but if you take just the time between 1 a.m. and 1 a.m. and 2 a.m., so you've got 0.8. You would have under at 1:45, is it correct you would have only 0.35 inches accumulated of the 0.8? You follow my math, sir?
I'm not sure what I follow in that sentence. Did you ask me how much snow fell between 1 a.m. and 2 a.m.?
That's another way of asking the question.
Okay, between 1 a.m. and 2 a.m., 0.3 of an inch is the estimated snowfall.
Right, very well. And so what I'd like to do now is to move down the chart to 3 a.m. How much snow has fallen or accumulated between 12 a.m. and 3 a.m.?
It would be 1 inch.
Right, and is an inch, and you're in the measurement business, about the size of a thumbnail?
Yeah, I actually use the knuckle on my thumb to the end of my thumb as an inch.
Right, so from the knuckle of one's thumb to the end of the thumb is 1 inch. Right. And under your terminology on direct, you had used the term very little. Would you consider from the knuckle to the top of the thumb very little snow?
definitely would require a comparison. 1 inch of snow has caused tremendous problems for people.
Right.
So I would not call it, just by the fact of 1 inch of snowfall, I would never say it's very little.
No, so I'm sorry, maybe my question wasn't clear. I'm not talking about effects of 1 inch. I'm just talking a measurement of 1 inch on a measurement scale. Would you still consider that your phrase, track a cat, or would you be out of the track a cat?
We'd be out of the track a
All
cat
right.
stage.
Got it. So, but again, the 1 inch being from the knuckle to the top of the thumb.
Yes.
Let's now go all the way down to about another time is 3:30 a.m., which we're going to focus on now, 3:30 a.m. How much snow had accumulated by 3:30 a.m.?
Well, we're going to have that inch we just talked about at length, and we're going to add the 2/10 from the previous day, the last few hours of the 28th, so we have 1.2. And now we're going to add another ½ inch by 4 a.m., so somewhere less than 1.7 inches, less than or equal to.
Wouldn't the number at 3:30 be 0.85 inches?
You're including the snowfall from the previous day, the 2/10 of an inch?
Yes.
No.
What would it be?
As I said, there's 1.2 inches up to 3 a.m., and then we're adding some amount before 4 a.m. Unknown how that was distributed within that hour, but something like 1.7 equal or less than total.
How about the accumulation between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m.? How much accumulation for that time period?
Between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m., so we have 3/10 of an inch up to 2, and another 4/10 of an inch, to a total of 0.7.
So between 1 and 3 a.m., there's only an accumulation of 0.7, correct?
Correct.
Inches.
Correct.
You had spoken a lot on your direct testimony about the magnitude of the storm, a variety of other measurements. But what I wanted to draw really a line at 6 a.m., which you said was an accumulation of 3.9. What I want to do is to now move on to from 7 a.m. on January 29th until noontime. And you can check my math, sir, but I get 12.5 inches total as of noon on January 29th.
I can do the arithmetic if it sounds about right. 8.6 inches fell up until noon, starting at 6 in that time period, which is about the amount we forecast. And did you ask about the total going back to the night before, or
Yeah, the total starting at midnight,
starting at midnight?
right, going until noon, so it's a 12-hour period of the same day, January 29th.
My quick calculation is 12.3 inches.
Right, and then you'd add the 0.2 from midnight?
Previous to midnight, yes.
Right, so 12.3 is what shows with all those numbers, but then you have to add the 0.2 from midnight, which would get you to 12.5, correct?
Exactly, yep.
Good. So just to summarize the first column there, all the way down from 1 a.m. to 12 p.m., at 6 a.m. we've got 3.9 inches, and then moving down to 12 p.m. we're at 12.5 inches, correct?
I believe so.
Sir, tell me when you're
Yes, yes.
So we're in alignment with those two numbers, 3.9 inches as of 6 a.m., 12.5 inches as of 12 p.m. on January 29th, correct?
Yes. Yeah, I'm sorry if I wasn't sure if you wanted me to do all the arithmetic again, but I did do that, and yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. I appreciate you doing that. You talked about the concept of visibility on your direct examination. In terms of visibility, did I hear you correctly that there's a correlation between the amount of snow coming down and visibility?
The intensity of the snowfall, so the amount over time and visibility, right?
Right. So the intensity or amount over time. How would you describe visibility from 12 midnight or 12 a.m. on January 29th until 1 a.m., that 1 hour period? How would you describe visibility?
I really don't know exactly. I can look at the report from Norwood Airport. They measure the visibility.
Could you do that, sir? Would that be easy enough for you to do?
Do you need a light, Mr. Gilman? Do you need lights on?
If we're going to do more than one, I would, but let's see if I can. Thank you, Your Honor. And we were asked about 1 a.m., is that?
Yes, visibility at 1 a.m.
Okay. Visibility reported at 1 a.m. was 1.2 miles in light snow.
And what does that mean, a visibility of 1.2 miles?
1.25 miles, 1.25 miles. That means that anything that was more than 1.25 miles away from the observer would be hidden by the snowfall. You wouldn't be able to see it.
And what does it mean if it were, the visibility was less than 1.25 miles?
Again, as the visibility lowers, you can, your ability to see objects in the distance is reduced.
So assume, sir, that somebody is 30 feet away from an object they want to see, and the visibility is 1.25 miles. Would they be able to see that object based upon your experience with visibility and your your career in that area?
All other things being equal, yes.
Right. So would it be fair to say visibility would be good from 30 feet if it's a 1.25 mile and beyond?
Can you answer that, Mr. Gilman?
Can I further explain to the jury about visibility? Thank you. A term like good for visibility would generally apply more toward 8 miles, 10 miles as good visibility. So it's hard to say that anything under 3 miles. For instance, we go from calling visibility reduction in haze to fog. Once it's really the same atmospheric phenomenon, but once you get below 3 miles, we call it fog or dense fog. So anything below that, when you reduce visibility by fog, haze, snow below 3 miles, it's hard to call it good visibility.
But if something is at 1.25 miles, there's visibility, correct?
Of 1.25 miles, yes.
There is
And
visibility.
again, if I could explain for the jury, a lot of this is developed for aviation.
Right.
And if you're a pilot or you think about what a pilot needs to go through, that's where these terms come from.
I understand, sir, but you are in the weather forecasting business, correct?
I sure am, yes.
And you, and weathercasters, we all here on TV talk about visibility on their forecast, correct?
Correct.
And they're not talking just to pilots, right? They're talking to people who are going to drive, people who are going to walk. Is that correct?
And it is a challenge to communicate that, yes.
But sir, my question is, when someone, a weathercaster, a weather person is talking about visibility, the main target audience are for people who are going to be driving or walking, correct? There's not pilots that they're giving.
Well,
that
I don't
information.
know, but I would never expect, and I do broadcast meteorology, a broadcast meteorologist to say visibility was good if it was less than 1.5 miles.
Yeah, sir, I appreciate that, but my question's not, I've left whether it's good or not. I'm talking about the purpose of weathercasters speaking about visibility.
Yes.
You had indicated in your earlier answer you had tethered it to pilots, but there's also an application of the visibility concept for the rest of us in the world who drive and walk, correct?
Yes,
Isn't it useful for that?
Absolutely, and I'm trying to answer your question about whether the visibility was good.
Right, but but I'm not asking that question anymore. My
Okay.
question is just,
I only know what you asked me.
All right. I'll try it a different way. Visibility is a concept that is used by weathercasters to assist people who are going to be walking or driving. Is that correct, sir?
Yes.
Thank you. So now let's go on to the concept of temperature. You mentioned the concept of wind chill on your direct examination. You recall that, sir?
I was asked about it, yes.
Yes. Does wind chill have a relationship to temperature, and if so, what is it?
It does have a relationship to temperature. It's a complex function that was developed by the U.S. Air Force in the 50s to help produce cold weather gear. And it was determined that wind had a major impact on our military in terms of what type of gear they needed, in addition to how low the temperature was. So it's a measurement of temperature to begin with, and then there's a complex function applied based on the wind speed to come up with how that air temperature, how that air is going to impact the human body.
So is it fair to say that if you have a temperature, and what I wanted to do is to go to the temperatures examination, is it accurate to state that, for example, on January 29th, I believe I heard you say there was a high of 29 and a low of 15. Is that correct, sir?
Yes, that was my report based on all those 3 locations, yes.
And you had also testified about wind speed and wind gusts as well. And can you state, if you have it in your notes?
I do, yes. It was
wind
in the
speed?
report, yep.
Yep. And what was the wind speed?
The-
Average and then high gusts.
Sure. 23 miles an hour with frequent gusts of 47 miles an hour.
So what does your number 23, how does that affect temperatures of 29 and 15?
It makes that air feel much colder. So that air, that 20-degree air, did you say 20 and
29, sir, and 15 were
Okay.
the numbers you had given?
that range for that day? Sure.
Yeah.
So it makes that air temperature feel colder, and it allows that air to take heat out of your body more efficiently and more rapidly. So it feels much colder, and we can calculate roughly how it would feel if there was no wind at all.
And sir, thank you. You've gotten right to my next point, and I only have a few more questions left for you. So if you have the highest temperature on the 29th of 29, January 29, 2022, do you know what the wind chill factor would do in terms of a calculation number to bring that 29 number down? Do you know what that number would result in applying the most conservative wind speed of 23?
I wasn't asked to calculate that, no?
Would it be less than 0? Just an estimate,
Based on the 29 temperature?
based on the 29.
No,
Would it
I
be
don't
in-
believe so.
Would it be in the teens?
Yes.
So the 29 would be in the teens, and then for the low of 15, approximately what number might that get down to?
again, depending on the wind, if you looked at 5 miles an hour, it wasn't that wind all day, and that 15-degree might not have been corresponding to any wind at all.
Just using your average that you used on direct of 23.
The average wind, again, made it feel much colder, bitterly cold, extremely cold when you were out in the highest wind at the lowest temperature. So it may have felt like 0 to even 10 below 0 at the lowest temperature and the highest wind gusts.
So if I got that correct, so 15 was the lowest temperature you gave on direct on January 29th, and you state that it would be, with the wind chill using about an average of 23, would be 0 or maybe minus 10. Is that the number correct?
Again, I'm just guessing. I didn't do the calculation. I wasn't asked to do the calculation. But based on my experience of reporting in this area for 45 years, I basically get the idea of what it's like when the temperature is that low and the wind is that high. Yeah.
Right, and if we could please have the chart published back up, please. You can keep the lights on, you just make it larger. I want to make sure Mr. Gilman has some facile with his notes. Okay, so is it correct to say that if the total accumulation for the storm was 23.8 inches, that the vast majority of that accumulation came well after 6 a.m.?
Yes.
And as of 6 a.m., we've only got 3.9 inches compared to what the storm ended up at about 23.8. And then, importantly, from midnight on January 29th until 3 a.m., we've got just 1.2 inches, correct?
Exactly.
May I have a moment, Your Honor?
Yes.
Thank you. Please bear with me a moment, Mr. Gilman. Thank you for answering my questions, Mr. Gilman.
You're welcome.
Anything else, Mr. Lally? Okay.
Mr. Gilman, you were asked about the snowfall between 12 a.m. and 1 a.m. How much snow again was there during that time frame?
During that time frame, about 3/10 of an inch.
Okay. And during that time frame was probably the least amount of snow that was on the ground during the course of the storm, correct?
During that hour or two previous. Yeah, there was really, in fact, I have this chart I showed, the graph, the map. It just showed a trace, a 0. There was less than an inch on the ground. And we measure snow on the ground in whole numbers, so it would either be 1 inch or 0.
And so that would be during what you've characterized as the track-a-cat stage, correct?
Yes.
And so it's during that track-a-cat stage that there's the least amount of snow between the frozen ground and anything that may come down on top of it, correct?
Yes.
Now, as quickly as it applies to visibility, when you were asked about visibility in 30 feet, you said all other things being equal. What are some of the things that would make it unequal?
A car in front of you, a building in front of you, a person, anything other than weather, and there are other types of weather that can lower the visibility besides snowfall, including fog.
So darkness, as far as nightfall versus daytime, that would have a negative impact on your visibility?
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
What about lighting? How would
Lighting?
lighting impact the visibility of an object?
I really can't say. Lighting, obviously, you need some light to see anything. That's really all I could say.
And lastly, sir, as far as wind chill is concerned, again, could you explain to the jury exactly what is wind chill? What is it measuring?
Again, it was developed for the military in the 50s to help design. It was actually done here at the Natick Labs here in Massachusetts to help design cold weather gear, because prior to that time, during World War II, the Korean War, unfortunately, especially Air Force aviators were suffering. They had clothing that might have been adequate for the temperature, but because of the wind, they suffered frostbite and other ill effects. And so research was done, and the result of that was a wind chill temperature, the way it would feel to the human body based on the wind on a certain temperature.
And so the wind chill is measuring the impact of how a person experiences the air temperature, correct?
Exactly.
I have nothing further. Thank you, sir.
Anything, Mr. Lassie?
No further questions, Your
All
Honor.
right, Mr. Gilman, you are all set, sir. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Do you have any the marked exhibits or identification?
I have relinquished them to this nice young lady.
Thank you. Next witness.
Thank you. The Commonwealth recalls Nick Guarino.
Okay.
Your Honor, I'll inform this will be the last recall for Mr. Guarino.
Thank you.
Solemnly swear the evidence you give in the court and jury in the case I again is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. I do.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Again, if you need to stand at anything.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. May I proceed?
Yes.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir.
Last time you appeared, there were a number of extraction reports that we introduced into evidence. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
And just remind us briefly what an extraction report is.
It's the information from the cell phones that I pull out via Cellbar.
All right, so I'm just going to ask that this witness identify himself.
My apologies, Your Honor. Could you please, again, introduce yourself to the jury, spell your last name for the record?
I'm Trooper Nicholas Guarino, Guarino.
You would explain what an extraction report is.
Yes, it's the information in the cell phones. We can create PDFs or portable cases from information, whatever is specified.
An extraction report, can it be general or more narrow?
Yes, it can be.
I want to introduce a few more extraction reports that we didn't get to last time.
Okay.
In this case, did you use Mr. O'Keefe's phone to create an extraction report that included all of his calls from the 28th and the 29th of January 2022?
Yes, I did.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
And your document, do you recognize that document?
Yes, I do.
And what is it?
It's John O'Keefe's call logs from everyone from the 29th to the 28th. Right.
I move this into evidence, please.
No objection, Your Honor.
Thank you. 65.
Did you create an extraction report that included a text message between the defendant and Jennifer McCabe?
Yes, I did.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
document. Do you recognize that?
Yes, I do.
Can you tell us what that is?
Yes, it's the text chain from the defendant to Jen McCabe.
I move this into evidence, please.
No objection, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Exhibit 66.
One moment. Thank you. With the court's permission, could Mr. Guarino read this to the jury?
Okay. Good question.
Could you kindly read that and explain it to the jury?
With all the information on it.
Yes.
This is from the defendant to Jen McCabe, 7:26:52 a.m. on the 29th. It says, can you send me Kerry's number?
Thank you. Did you further create an extract?
Sorry, Mr. Brennan, in terms of that reading of the document, you just have to check on that piece. Sorry, everyone.
No problem.
Yes.
Can you review that again?
Yes.
And do you see who that's from? And who it's to?
I'm sorry, it's from Jen McCabe to the defendant.
And what does it say?
Can you send me Kerry's number?
What time and date?
That is 7:26:52 a.m. on April 29th, 2022.
Thank you. Did you do a further extraction report from John O'Keefe's phone with text messages between him and a person named Kaylee?
Yes, I did.
May I approach?
Yes.
You recognize that?
Yes.
What is it?
It's the text chain between John O'Keefe and Kaylee.
The date?
It goes, sorry, it's kind of faded. January 28th, 2022 to January 29th, 2022.
Thank you. I move this into evidence.
No objection, Your Honor.
Okay.
Thank you.
Exhibit 67.
Okay, Trooper Guarino, we're done with extraction reports.
Okay.
Did you have an opportunity to obtain phone messages, phone calls, and text messages between the defendant and Mr. O'Keefe?
Hold on. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. Trooper Guarino, did you have an opportunity to obtain phone calls, voice messages, and text messages from the defendant to Mr. O'Keefe's phone on the evening of January 29th, 2022?
Yes, I was.
Where did you get the phone call records from?
From John O'Keefe's phone.
Where did you get the voicemails from?
Also from John O'Keefe's phone.
Where did you get the text messages from?
From John O'Keefe's phone.
Did you have an opportunity to take those phone calls, the voice messages, and the text messages and put them in a chronological order?
Yes, I did.
Did you include all of the phone calls, all the text messages, and all of the voicemails?
Between John O'Keefe and the defendant, yes.
Did you create a PowerPoint to put them in a chronological order?
Yes.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes. Show Mr. Alessi.
Sorry. showing you a binder, sir. Could you open it up? Tell us what this is.
Yes, this is the phone calls and text messages between the defendant and John O'Keefe, as well as the voicemails. Well,
Is there a package in the front of that binder?
yes, there is.
And what is that package?
It says defendant's voicemails and on 1/29/2022. The USB thumb drive that should have those files on.
Your Honor, I move this binder as the next exhibit. It would include both a PowerPoint presentation as well as a clip of the phone calls.
No objection, Your Honor.
Should, yes. Do you need the thumb drives?
I don't.
Okay.
Mark this, please.
Exhibit 68. Thank you.
Thank you.
With the court's permission, I would ask that Trooper Guarino take us through the PowerPoint presentation.
Yes.
Thank you.
Is it okay to begin? Okay.
Please.
So these are the phone calls on the 29th. So at 12:33:35 a.m., the defendant calls John. That phone call is not answered. 12:34:09 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 12:34:38 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 12:35:09 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 12:35:35, the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 12:36:09 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered.
Trooper Guarino, let me stop you there for a second. Did you look into any internet connection between the defendant's phone and the router and the internet connection at Meadows Ave, John O'Keefe's home that night?
Yes, at 12:36:39 a.m., the defendant's phone auto connects to the Wi-Fi HATSFAM 123.
Are you familiar with the router at Mr. O'Keefe's home?
I have not done a look at it in person, but that's the known network that's listed under it. There's two, HATSFAM 123 and O'Keefe 74.
Did
Two
you
names.
learn the range that a connection must be in order to connect to his router?
Yes, so depending on the router, it's either a 2.4 gigahertz or 5 gigahertz radio band or signal band, I should say. Depending on which one it's connecting to, which band, it's either 150-foot indoor range or up to 300 feet outdoor. So again, when you pull into your home, sometimes you can still be connected to your home Wi-Fi in the driveway.
And again, can you give us the time of the connection between the defendant's phone and Mr. O'Keefe's router at Meadows Ave that night?
Yes, 12:36:39 a.m.
Please continue.
At 12:36:40 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. At 12:37:08 a.m., the defendant calls John, and voicemail number 1 is left with voice.
Ms. Gilman, would you kindly play the voicemail for 12:37:08?
At 12:38:26 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 12:39:03 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 12:39:37 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 12:40:43 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. At 12:41:35 a.m., the defendant calls John. Voicemail number 2 is left. Some beeping noises, appears to be a butt dial or accidental call.
Ms. Gilman, could you play the voice message at 12:41:35?
The defendant then texts John O'Keefe at 12:55:31 a.m. on the 29th, "I'm going home." The defendant texts John O'Keefe, "See you later," at 12:55:50 a.m. on the 29th. At 8:19 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 12:58:47 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 12:59:24 a.m., the defendant calls John. Voicemail number 3 is left with voice.
Ms. Gilman?
John, I'm here with your fucking kids. Nobody knows what the fuck you want, you fucking pervert.
At 1 a.m. and 26 seconds, the defendant calls John. It's not answered. At 1 a.m. 49 seconds, the defendant calls John. Voicemail number 4 is left. It's 1 second called, no sound.
Ms. Gilman?
That was it. The defendant texts John O'Keefe, "Your kids are cucking alone," at 1:02 a.m. on the 29th. The defendant texts John O'Keefe, "I'm back in Mansfield. The kids are home alone," 1:04:14 a.m. on the 29th. At 1:10:17 a.m., the defendant calls John. Voicemail number 5 is left with voice.
Ms. Gilman?
Yeah, it's 1 in the morning. I'm with your fucking niece and nephew. You fucking pervert. You're a fucking pervert.
At 1:10:44 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. At 1:12:18 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 1:12:46 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 1:13:13 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. Sorry. At 1:14:11 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 1:14:44 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 1:16:10 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 1:16:38 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. At 1:17:37 a.m., the defendant calls John. So when voicemail 6 is left with voice.
Ms. Gilman?
John, I'm going home. I cannot babysit your niece. I need to go home. You are fucking using me right now. You're fucking another girl. Kim's sleeping next to me. You're a fucking loser. Fuck yourself.
At 1:18:38 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. At 4:38:14 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 4:38:49 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 4:39:39 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 4:40:05 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 4:42:05 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 4:42:54 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 4:45:10 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 5:04:27 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 5:21:28 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 5:21:58 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 5:23:26 a.m., the defendant calls John. Voicemail number 7 is left with voice.
Ms. Gilman?
John, I just want to cry you.
At 5:24:27 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 5:25:28 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 5:26:14 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 5:28:16 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 5:28:43 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 5:29:21 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 5:29:46 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 5:30:15 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 5:30:52 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 5:31:21 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 5:36:29 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 6:03:02 a.m., the defendant calls John, and voicemail number 8 is left with some voice and noise and background.
Ms. Gilman, could you play that, please?
Yes, I need someone to report at you. 34 beautiful Vietnam with a handcuff notice no. Yeah. Okay, I know. Where's the blankets? I don't see blankets, Harry. Yes, I need something.
If we could have the lights on, please. I have no further questions.
All right. Mr. Alessi, does this seem like a good time to take the luncheon recess?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. All right, so folks, we will take a 45-minute luncheon recess. And Trooper, you can just follow them for the